welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of the Right podcast, The Cost of Editing. I'm Elon.
I'm John.
And I'm Craig.
And today we're going to talk about editorial services. This is actually how I met these guys, because, spoiler alert, if you remember our last season, we work together at an editing company that is owned by John and Craig, right? You guys both own it together?
That's right.
Legally, but it's really more John's thing.
Yeah. Either way, so I'm an editor. John's an editor. John is an actual editor. I'm kind of an editor apprentice and in process. Although I've done some projects.
You're junior editor.
I'm a junior editor.
Other than apprentice.
That's good. I've graduated. So the question is, why are editorial services so pricey? And the reason that this comes up a lot is because oftentimes writers say, you know, I'd love to have my work edited, but I can't afford it. That's too much of an investment, and I can just put the book out the way it is. But in my opinion, as a writer, editor, and reader, editing is critical. It is vital. It is so important to the overall quality of written work that it is a cost that must be assumed if you want to create something of real value. Not because everyone wrote a first draft. For instance, my parents just went to Paris, and they hung out at that one cafe where what's his name? The guy?
Hemingway?
That's the guy.
Yes, yeah.
Where Hemingway wrote, and they got a chance to see some framed initial drafts of Hemingway's work. And my dad said it was beautiful and amazing because Hemingway is, when you read Hemingway, it seems like an effortless and simple thing, but the pages that he edited himself, my dad said he saw one page where every single thing was crossed out except 5 words. So like even that dude, who's a true master of language in some people's opinion, edited
he does
himself
have a famous thing. Oh.
and had editors. What is the famous thing he does?
He has a famous saying about first drafts.
Is it PG?
No, it's
Usually
not.
they're not. Usually Hemingway's quotes are not.
Hemingway first draft, and Google will tell you the rest.
But yeah, so what goes into editing? Why is it so pricey? Yeah.
Well, I mean, part of it is that editing takes time. I mean, an editor's they're not just gonna read your manuscript. They're gonna go over and think about it. I mean, when I edit a manuscript, depending on the type of editing I'm doing, a lot of times I have to stop and I have to think, and that is the time vacuum right there. So you can take the amount of time just to read a book. Let's say your manuscript is typical 80,000 words. So that's like a 300 to 400 page novel. That might take someone between 7 and 12 hours just to read. But when you're editing, you can double, if not sometimes triple that, because you have to stop and think and analyze and comment. So there's that angle, but then there's the hourly rate, because this isn't just a simple task where you're necessarily working at minimum wage. I mean, there's skill and experience, because the editor's a professional. I mean, myself, I've read many editing manuals. I've apprenticed under a few different editors, and I've been involved in more than 100 different projects to date. So that experience is, that editor's bringing that to the plate. So they're not just some person reading your book and going to tell you, fix this, make it better. It's not just knowing what to fix. It's also knowing how to communicate through the comments. I mean, I have refined that process a lot, because initially you don't realize sometimes when you're trying to communicate something, the writer will their eyes will glaze over if you don't nail the point and give them the right directive. So that's all the sorts of things that you're paying for when you're paying for a really good editor to work on your stuff. And that can come into, for that 80,000 word, 300 to 400 page novel, that can come into more than $1,000, depending on what you're all having done. Mm-hmm. If you have a couple editors and you follow the traditional process, which we do in our company, then you could be paying like close to $1,000 per revision, and you're not just throwing that money away so that you can make the editors happy, you're paying them for a lot of hard work that's been done. You
Absolutely.
don't take your car into the mechanic and they work at $100 an hour and they're fixing your car and it's hopefully going to run for the next while and they're not going to break it, right? And it's the same thing with an editor who's taking your manuscript. They're doing some really critical work to make it better and make it stand up so that it's any things that are outstanding that readers are going to be like, something's wrong with this book, that's going to disappear.
Totally. Simple things down to like even something along the lines of a formatting error that can completely kick a reader out of the story and make them wonder and lose all momentum. I read a book recently where throughout the entire manuscript, it was an ebook. None of the internal monologue was italicized. That was an error in the manuscript, but it became sort of unwieldy and difficult to read. I understood what was going on because the voice would change within those internal monologues, and it was very obvious because they were delivered in third person or in first person, where the novel was in first person. But it was very jarring, and it was a huge problem that would have been fixed with editing. And that's like, mechanical editing, but there's things like developmental editing that wherein you hire an editor with experience to help bring your story into itself more solidly. Because I know that as a pantser, my own writing can get kind of all over the place. Like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened is a recipe for disaster, usually. But having a developmental editor say, oh, here are the kernels of your story, and if you seed this here, if you leave this out there, then the experience will be better for a reader. And that kind of stuff is invaluable, and it will make your book so much better. And it's why, look, the Hugos give out awards to editors. Editors have an entire enormous community where they give each other awards because it's a profession. Mm-hmm. There are people who don't want to be writers; they want to be editors because an editor's job is to facilitate the creative process in such a way that they are bolstering other people's creative ideas. And there's a lot to love in that. In fact, I've discovered that I actually really enjoy editing much more than I ever thought I would. Because I learn a ton as I edit, and I get a chance to see stories at all these different stages, and I find it really exciting and wonderful. So Craig, you've written a whole mess of stuff. Is John your editor, or do you have another editor who's separate?
Yeah, so I've written over 70 things now. I have used John as my editor in the past. I use someone else now just because John knows me too well, and so I think he wants it. We just have a little bit of conflict sometimes because I think because he knows me so well, and he can say, you've written some. We can't use we have to use PG language. Okay, you've written some real poop here, is what he might say. And so we butt heads a bit. So I have a different editor that I use now. And sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes I self-edit. I do prefer to use an editor because an editor can identify weaknesses that I cannot see myself in my own writing. And whether or not it's a real weakness or if it's just not reaching its potential, an editor can identify those points and say, I'm really getting the sense that you could make your story blank if in this section you blank. So it might be adding some description, it might be adding some dialogue, it might be telling the reader what the character is feeling. That was my biggest challenge, is I needed to put character feelings in there. That was my biggest learning over writing so many things. Sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit. But yeah, editing is crucial. Professional editing, not getting like your sister or your brother or your mom or your dad to read your book, that's beta reading. That's a little bit different. And someone who is related to you is predisposed to wanting to like it. And whether or not they can be honest with you about whether they like it, they probably don't have the skills that an editor has to highlight the problems and identify how to fix them.
So you answered the question that I was going to ask after this, especially because you're married to an editor, and this is a situation where it's like, well, this is a person with a skill, but they still probably shouldn't be the one to do it. My mom, for instance, is an English professor, and she edited all of my essays when I was a kid. She taught me how to write. She's also a published writer, and I read things to her, or she'll read my work as a beta reader, but never as an editor, because we both know that it's a recipe for disaster. For the same reason you probably wouldn't want to use your mom as your therapist, you probably don't want to use your mom as your editor. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Craig. It's a matter of someone with an outside perspective and a set of tools and experience that can bring in such awareness that, as someone who's deeply embedded in something, you by default don't have. Like self-editing, you can do some mechanical stuff and you can try to get some sort of developmental things happening, and it's something that we do all the time as writers anyway as we work, but the actual process of that editing can't be done by you.
And then on the flip side, I had a recent project that I thought was terrible. Like, took me a long time to write it. I finally finished, and I'm like, this is going to need some serious work because there is something wrong with it and I can't figure it out. And I sent it to the editor, and like, he absolutely loved it. Like, he did identify a lot of key parts where I needed to expand to make it stronger, but it was nowhere near like this big disaster that I thought it was going to be. And like, he was able to reaffirm me that yes, I do actually know what I'm doing, because writers get plagued with self-doubt a lot. And a good editor not only points out the mistakes, a good editor also points out where your strengths are. And so like, I'm really thankful for that editor for what he did with that project, because I probably would have trashed it and just started over. And so I saved myself a whole heck of time and stress just by sending it to the editor as is.
Yeah, and sometimes even if they don't comment on what they enjoy, not critiquing the parts that there will be things that they'll critique which isn't what you were expecting, and so the parts you think are crap are actually fine, and that's important. I mean, even though I do editing, as a writer, I have a separate editor. And it's just, you can't edit your own work, period. There is no exception to that. How you can self-edit, that's why it has its own term, right? It's kind of like saying like it's almost like you're committing some kind of a sin. You're self-editing, don't self-edit. Well, I mean, you have to, because here's the thing.
You don't prescribe yourself medicine, right?
That's right, unless you're self-medicating,
right? Which is also bad for the same kind of reason. Like, that's the point.
My point. But here's the thing: self-editing is important, and it's a little side point, probably worth bringing up here. When you're going to hire an editor, make sure you're ready for editing, because a lot of times you'll turn your first draft in, but it's really your fourth or fifth that the editor should be getting. Because otherwise you're going to spend a lot of money, and or the editor's job is going to be useless because they can't take it deeper. If you still have more work that you need to do, the story's not there yet and you're not ready, then the editor has to take that finished story and then go to that deeper level of completion. I've looked at some things that I could just tell this is not ready. And I'm at the point now where I will actually turn an author down if they come to hire me for editing, if I could tell that this actually needs lots of work. If you want to do like a coaching edit where I'll help you, give you some pointers for what you need to revise on your own, that's fine. But you need to be able to do a degree of self-editing beforehand. But when it comes to publication, if you're going to put a book out there, self-publish, and you want to have a professional indie platform, you should have that separate editor come in, at least one. Ideally you should have three, because that's what the traditional publishing industry tried and tested model has been doing, I guess, since whenever they started.
Well, that's the thing. Like, there's a reason they do it that way, and it's because the final product is of a certain quality. It's you come to expect that like Tor isn't going to put out a book with like issues of first and third person inconsistency or tense problems, because those are things that you will never put out as a big editor. But I was actually wondering if you're familiar at all with the process for say you're like an agented writer who's publishing for one of the big five. Do you know if they turn in earlier drafts than third or fourth to an editor, or to their editor at the spot, or to their agent, or to whomever? This is an honest question. Like, the answer might be you don't know, but
I've heard a little bit about this. I think it depends. You'll hear different stories. It always depends on the relationship between the agent and the author. So sometimes it might be that they'll turn in even a draft in progress to get the agent's input. But when it comes to what the agent's going to sell, I mean, there'd be the agent, but then there'd be the editor. Because when you get established, you work with a certain editor at a big publisher, and there's a collaboration that happens between that author and that editor, and I think it varies with every author. But if you're a new debut author and you're trying to break in, there's a myth. The myth is that your manuscript has to be perfect or you won't make it. That's not true. Your manuscript may need editing, and they may take it because the story or the concept, or there's something that it's right hitting that thing in the market that the marketing editors are raving about, and that's why they're going to take it. Might need some editing, but you know what? The investment will be worth it. But as a rule, the more polished you are as a debut novelist, the better, because it's less likely if they're going to take a chance on you, they don't have to spend as much. Their editors are not going to be like working as much on this novel as they would something that needs a lot of work, but they'll still take because it had a lot of potential. So I think that's the thing. If you're an established novelist and the editor has faith in you and they know you're good at polishing things up, you might be able to submit rougher stuff.
Yeah, but I know of people who, like, at this point in their career, they've been so prolific that they just sell pitches. They're like, I have an idea for a story about this, and Tor is like, you got it, whatever. Here's $2 million. Go nuts. And for most people, that's not going to be the case, obviously. The thing about editing, it's, like, what we're talking about, especially given the indie author conundrum, which is I'm doing this independently. Typically, that means I have another full-time job. And I don't have a lot of time or a lot of extra money to spend on these services. So the whole notion of what editing should cost is very important. And you brought up the sort of like $1,000 range per editorial pass, depending on the length of the book, but 80,000 words is a good average to go with. But what should editing cost, and should cost be a deciding factor first and foremost, or should you be looking for someone or a company that edits your genre? Should you be looking for people that you know who they use? Like, what would you recommend as the process for someone looking to find an editor?
Well, I mean, the thing that I used to find editors in the past was going on word of mouth. So talk to other writers and trust, and find out who their editor is. That's been hit or miss with me. The editor that I use right now, I connected with through a service that I got involved with for my own writing. And just because of the relationship that formed between me and my editor, that's why it's like I work with her. So I have been the victim of bad editors in the past that I've hired, and I have lost lots of money through that. Painful lesson learned. And unfortunately, you don't know until you try. And sometimes the editor will be good, but they're just not the editor for you. So the best thing you can do if you're looking for an editor is get a sample. See if they can sample edit 5 to 10 pages of your work. Even if you pay for it, that's okay.
Because that shouldn't cost you more than $20.
No, and the thing is, that at least gets you a sense. Are they do they dig right in? Do they get it? Is this it? I mean, the biggest thing you want is you want the editor to challenge you. If the editor's not giving you anything challenging, they're not going to make a big difference on your work. And I mean, it might just be that your book's really good, but generally speaking, that's not the case. Usually there are some issues that need fixed. Not saying the book is bad, but there are going to be some more serious things that need to get done. And you want to see, is the editor taking a critical approach to this, or is it just like fixing typos and spelling mistakes and rewording a few things? And like, you don't want just that. You want to see signs that there's something critical going on.
Totally.
And it is hard because there will be some services that are very expensive. There are a lot of services now, companies that will have editors who used to work for the big houses. And I can't name them all, but there's quite a few out there, and they will advertise those credentials and high cost, and you might get the same value of editing as you would with like something much cheaper, but an editor who just gets in there like a dirty sock and goes through everything and really knows their storytelling theory and everything. So yeah, it's the answer. Long answer to that is it's hard.
There was something that Craig said before we hit record on this episode that I thought was particularly intelligent, which was that cost shouldn't be a hallmark. Is that the word you chose? Because I loved it. Cost shouldn't be a hallmark of editing quality. And I think that's very wise, because we tend to think that something is more expensive, ergo it is better. And the case is often that you can find something either equally good or equivalently good for less, but you shouldn't be trying to like minimize your spend on editing, because you should just accept the fact that it is a cost associated with releasing a quality product. And if you want to be a writer and you want to take yourself seriously as an independent writer, it's one of the costs that simply must be assumed. So we are a little bit over time, and John has a recommendation for a website to check out regarding editing price. It's the EFA, right?
The EFA, Editors and Freelancers Association. I believe that's what it's called.
Sounds right.
It's the-efa.org. That's the website. We're going to, it's probably easier if you just put the URL in the liner notes.
I will, yeah.
Because it's a lot of letters for me to read out here.
Yeah, it's got 2 slashes and a .php and all kinds of good stuff. So
yeah, so we'll have that for the liner notes. But basically, this is a chart that breaks down the different types of editing and common hourly wage ranges, as well as common paces that are expected for different types of editing. So you'll see developmental editing, you'll see editorial assessments, you'll see copy editing. I think they have ghostwriting, copywriting. They cover a lot of different things, but it's just a good reference for you to get a sense of how much you can expect some editing things to cost. So when you're pricing people out, you could see, are they very affordable? Is this at the high end? And there's a lot of writers want to get into editing themselves, and I expect that we probably have a lot of listeners who might be writers learning to edit or wanting to get into editing. So it's a great reference for that as well, if you want to start out and know what's a reasonable thing to charge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add to that like the editor web is as big as the writing web. Editors are as common, as prolific, and as interested in their craft as writers are. And you can go to things like copyediting.com, which is they have a newsletter, great resource as well. There are so many editors who really want to hone their craft, and they can really help you, and you can help them. So it's a great relationship. And with that, I think we're going to end the episode. Thank you for listening, and tune in next week when we're going to be talking about sleep. Bye-bye.